The topic of today's virtual community event is Agile Thinking in Hard to Find Places. I'm Dan Newman. I'll be handling some of the behind the scenes duties here in support of Quincy, who's going to be hosting our 4-person panel and exploring this topic. The folks who are the stars of the show: Quincy is director at AgileThought. He's an executive advisor in our Transform practice. We have Natal Dank, who is the author of the book Agile HR and co-founder of PXO Culture. We also have Yvonne Marcus, an Agile coach for families. I had the pleasure of doing a podcast with Yvonne on that topic, and she is Yvonne Marcus Consulting. And then last but certainly not least, Cindy Cruz, the Director of Idea to Innovation at PwC. So thank you, panelists, for joining.
Awesome. Well, one, I want to say big thank you to our guest panelists today. Very much appreciative of you all joining and being willing to come. I'm very excited to hear about some of your experiences and what you're seeing in your perspective areas, from finance to HR to Agile for the families, which I think is like awesome. Like all the rest of the stuff doesn't work if Agile for the families doesn't work, right? So I'm very excited to hear all these different aspects. And so part of the intent with this is that we think of Agile oftentimes pretty much isolated into the IT space. When we go in and we do transformations and so forth, many times it's, even with leadership, it's okay, well, that's that IT thing, and you all go do that and make it work, for the organization. And so we wanted to really explore some of the areas that are outside of IT, and specifically some of the areas that are in some ways unconventional in terms of the thinking. And so we're not necessarily talking about frameworks per se, specifically, or methodology, but we're really honing in on Agile thinking and how Agile thinking plays a place in Agile for the families, how it plays, has a place in finance and HR and so forth. So we'll have some discussion, we'll tie some things back to different aspects of the Agile Manifesto as we go, and we'll just have fun with it. So we'll just have good interaction. So if you have questions, please put those in the chat. Dan's going to help us with that. And so we will go ahead and dive right in. So when we're thinking about the Agile Manifesto, and we're saying individuals and interactions over processes and tools, or working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Well, how do those things manifest themselves in, let's say, HR? And so, Natal, if you could just kind of jump in a little bit here and speak to that a little bit, like what Agile approaches have been working in the area of HR and why?
Okay, great. I think that it's really good that you've started with the manifesto, because what's interesting is that while some of the words might feel a bit techie to someone from HR when they first read it, it resonates with so much of what HR is attempting to do. So the first one, you essentially could read that as people over process. And if you think about where HR is in terms of the legacy, in terms of what's happened with how we've built people practices, processes and systems over the years, in the profession, we even talk about it. We've lost the human touch, and it became a little bit more about what people needed, what you needed people to go and do, and kind of added things on to work rather than meeting people in the flow of work and really looking at how do you help them be the best that they can be. And over the years, when I was, a HR person in-house myself, before I had discovered Agile, the amount of times I would talk about something like performance management, and I'd say, oh, but it's all about the conversations. It's not about the tool, or it's not about the boxes that you have to tick. Where That's right. But I also, at the time, I didn't kind of get the fact that the way we had designed it meant that people just weren't going to engage with it in that way, because it felt like an add-on. It wasn't helping them in the flow of work. So there's so much that really resonates in the manifesto for HR. And of course, things like working software over documentation can start to be read as actually helping people make decisions in the workplace before you write the policy. And actually, if you only follow the policy, you're not really usually enabled to make real-time decisions. So actually, how do you
that
create
would be a
this
novel idea, right?
Yeah, totally. How do you
Yeah.
create an environment of behaviors and values and, and kind of expectations of how we engage with each other that helps people make decisions real time, rather than just reading the policy and ticking the box. So there's so much in the manifesto. You can talk about it for hours with HR people. And once they get it and they start to link it to their own examples, I think they really start to understand what the mindset can actually be in their own space.
Yeah, and I think every transformation, until you can really penetrate into HR, I think you have some good success, but you almost reach a point of agile nirvana once you can really get into HR. And you talked about, ticking the boxes and those policies and so forth. And I don't know, other than legal, I don't know if I can think of another area that may have more boxes to tick and so forth than finance.
Compliance, come on, finance is not bad as well. I'm sure Cindy can comment on that. But yeah, look, what's really interesting about the kind of legacy of HR is that there's actually lots of great intention sitting behind some of those boxes. So a great example is making career development mandatory in appraisals. That has a good intent of, we want to help people have a good career. But when it is made mandatory and it is a conversation that you must have, with your manager, at a certain time of year, of course, it just loses all the kind of value that we want it to have. So, I very much agree with you when it comes to agile business agility as a whole, not just sort of agile transformation, but the concept of business agility. HR need to be part of that. And because a lot of the people practices that exist, particularly if you're an organization that's going to be going from traditional to agile, then a lot of the existing people practices will cause blockers very quickly as you start to transform. But also, and this is where I kind of get really passionate, because I think this is how we can help HR be part of that, is that HR can just benefit so much from embracing agile mindset and ways of working themselves. Because if you start to co-create solutions with people, properly use a test, properly use feedback, and the feedback loop to build people practices that they actually value, your job is just so much better. You'll just get such better outcomes. So for me, there's a double, which is helping HR understand and use it, as well as HR starting to play a role as a type of agile coach in itself to guide transformation. And that's where I think the two of us can come together so much, because we have a bit of org development background and change background, which can really help agile coaches. But then agile coaches bring the value of years of experience in the agile development space. So I think together we can really make a difference.
Completely agree. So Cindy, when we're looking at ticking those boxes in finance, and oftentimes, people think of finance as, the straight and narrow, the suits and so forth. But I am pretty convinced that's not always the case. And I think you have, had some experience in that area that may, speak otherwise to that. So what have you seen in terms of what agile approaches have worked in finance and why?
Thanks, Quincy. Yes, many people think of finance in a very linear, black and white way. And I'll be honest, a lot of finance professionals think of themselves in that way. It goes back to what they've learned and how they've learned it. When I pause and look at the manifestos, Natal, I love how you started with that. It's ironic to me because we are basically, from a finance perspective, the right side of the values in the manifesto. You think about processes and tools and compliance, right? You have to have processes and controls. We have to document everything. We feel like we need to. CYA, to someone else could pick it up and do it. We want things to be in writing, so contract negotiation. and we want to plan because we don't want to fail. We want to be perfect. And we feel like our stakeholders demand that, right? They need quality information from finance professionals. So the transformation that I've seen finance go through in 18 months, I mean, it's really turned everything on its head and it's made people feel really uncomfortable. But we had to start to change because we had frustrated customers. We didn't have enough time to innovate. We had misaligned priorities. We felt like we had to be perfect, which was inhibiting our progress. So the two areas, Quincy, to answer your question, that, in my opinion, in the manifesto that we've really had to kind of work on and have developed as mindsets and ways of working is around the concept of working software, which may sound weird to you all, but just getting something of value out. And the concept of the MVP has been incredibly maybe exhilarating for people. And what is the value that can be created today or tomorrow or soon versus this huge project or deliverable that could be delivered in 12 months. And for finance professionals to start just thinking, what's the incremental value and what can I provide my customer soon and get feedback on, has been eye-opening for many and freeing for finance professionals. The other is responding to change. And I always think about ish there and perfection over progress. And so many finance professionals, you want to be perfect, especially in responding to change. You want to CYA yourself. You don't want to say the wrong thing. And so we've worked really hard to walk that tightrope of what can we be ish on and what do we need to be more on that perfection side. And those opportunities where we've been more ish have been really freeing. That mindset idea of let's just create something and put it in front of people and get their feedback. And
Cindy,
yeah, go ahead.
You said something that I want to go back to really quickly. So one of the aspects of Agile is heavily about being transparent and transparency. And you touched on some of the things around really CYA and people making sure that they're covered. And so sometimes there is a struggle, with dotting your I's, crossing your T's, but being transparent, at the same time. Are you able to speak to that concept, at all in finance?
So when you asked that question, I immediately went to vulnerability and psychological safety, and that how might we as finance professionals be more vulnerable and saying to people, especially in a group like PwC, we're not privately held. We're not publicly held, we're privately held. I put this together. It's not perfect. I did that on purpose to get you something quickly. I'd like your feedback on it, and being vulnerable about that and being honest with why you're approaching them in that vulnerable way, and building trust in that way. So it's being bold to tell, like, a leader, for example, that you're preparing something for, saying no, or again, just saying this, it might, and leveling on intent early on and saying, what are you really intending to receive here? So it's being bold, it's being vulnerable, and it's really working on psychological safety so that it's okay to not have those I's dotted and the T's crossed.
Nice. Yeah, so that kind of brings to mind, I don't know of a place where there's more vulnerability and a need for psychological safety than the home. And that, makes me think of some of the work that Yvonne Marcus is doing in Agile for the Families. And so, Yvonne, could you kind of speak to that a little bit? I don't want to say it's unique as much as it's maybe not thought of as much with Agile for the Families. And before we started, I kind of jokingly said, well, if Agile for the Families isn't working, the rest of the stuff is not going to work too well if that's not happening. So could you kind of share a little bit about the approaches that you've been seeing working with Agile for the Families, and maybe even, like a 1 minute spill of what that even means?
Yeah, so when you're having Agile for the Family, you're using these processes that are in the Agile Manifesto in order to teach your family how to communicate and how to effectively create tools that are going to be useful in the home. And even out in the world, because you're teaching communication skills starting at a very young age, and receiving and giving of feedback. Like, those are huge things that people need to know how to do forever. And when you learn them at 3 and 5, which is the age of my children, you're well equipped. And we like to value people over processes by saying that, like, one of the main things I tell my clients is you need consent before you implement a software tool into your family. You can't just go and download a calendar onto your partner's phone and say, you're going to use this, because you won't get buy-in. They will say, I'm not going to open it. I'm never going to look at it. And then you have lost them completely. And that is a vital part. We use Google Calendar and a DAC board in my house in order so that the display is in our kitchen. So when we have our daily Scrum, which is what we run, we're able to just look at it and have that conversation back and forth. And the other thing is the MVP, as Cindy mentioned, is huge in the home, because let's just talk about the world in which Pinterest is the place where you go and look at everybody's perfectly cultivated house, and you have all of this input and stimuli coming to you about what it should look like or what it could look like. But is it even useful to you? If it is not, then that is not a process that's going to work for you. And again, no one is going to use it. And then also, I like to talk about the value of the user story, because when we bring a user story to our meetings, we're no longer placing blame on someone else, because we've created a story that's like, I am a mom and I need 30 minutes to myself every day where no one is talking to me. And no one is asking me for something because I'm overstimulated, and that's making me more grouchy. So now it's not my kids are asking me for something every 5 seconds. They're always needing a snack. It's not now placing the blame on someone else in your family. It's bringing it back to, this is my issue and this is what I need. And now let's have a conversation around what that answer is. And then you write down everybody's answer so they feel like they're giving you valuable input. And then you decide on the solution that you're going to try. In our house, we try it for 2 weeks.
I think that's awesome.
And then if it's working, we keep going.
Yeah, and I think that is phenomenal. To take that approach to uniquely use Agile in the home. I know I have helped my son create Kanban boards to keep up with his work. Don't know if I'll say it's been the most effective for him, but when he's used it, it has really worked. Getting him to use it on a regular basis is a little different, but maybe I need to talk to you a little bit more.
That's
Yvonne,
kids,
so
man.
Hey Quincy, I'm not sure if you have visibility to the chat. There were a couple of questions or comments that came in. If now's a good time.
Sure, far away, Dan.
Yep. One of them from MC, are there any family-friendly terms that can be used instead of Agile? It may help reduce the passive resistance.
Oh, yeah. So I still use the term Agile, but I sort of define what it is instead of saying Agile. I will say, we're going to start this system that allows us to set goals for the 2 weeks, and everybody gets to have input. And don't you want to be able to participate in, what's going to change in your room, or where would your laundry basket be best placed in order for you to be able to put your laundry in it at the end of the day. Because that was a huge discussion I had with my kids. The laundry basket was never getting clothes in it. Putting it right between their two rooms ended up being the solution that worked. And oftentimes I just tell people not to present it as like a fancy system you're going to be using even, and just say, we're going to have this meeting and we're going to kind of set these goals and then tell people what the system is later. That as people see it working, they're more likely to just buy into it and understand what you're doing.
So I love the idea of being able to keep things nice and simple. And I think that is oftentimes a reoccurring theme in Agile spaces of all sorts. But some spaces are not always as simple. They're not always as cut and dry to be able to do that. And that can cause some discomfort. And Cindy mentioned earlier about, people not being comfortable at times. And so I'm wondering, Natal, where are you seeing Agile thinking emerge more in the HR space, where people are having to maybe move past some of those discomforts, and that Agile thinking is becoming a little bit more front and center?
Well, it's a very good question. What I might just link back to what Yvonne just said and say, I think
Absolutely.
That is also very common in a lot of organizations today. And also when I am speaking around Agile for people in HR, and I imagine Cindy's the same, sometimes the word Agile is too, like there's too much wrapped up in it. And if anyone's had a bad experience, which we know is generally because it wasn't set up for success, it is almost kind of, oh no, not that, so.
What's the phrase now? Triggered?
Yeah, exactly.
Triggers.
So I think that I think the same concept is actually really important to think about for your own organization and your own function. And so we use a lot of, contemporary ways of working. And then in the HR space, we talk a lot about people experience and your people experience and operations, sort of like modern HR. And that is a portfolio of product and services. It's about the employee experience, like a customer experience. It's all the same stuff that we're talking about in the business space when we bring Agile in. But if you use those terms and then you bring in the Agile methods or system, and then start to introduce some of the terminology about it, usually people kind of resonate more with it. And I would say that then crosses over a little bit to what Cindy was saying earlier about when you asked Cindy around how do you deal with this space where transparency means that you're sharing information before it might be seen as, totally correct, or and then in the finance area, there's this need to be seen as perfect before you release something. That same thing definitely exists in HR as well. And what's interesting, however, is when you get people to understand the idea that it helps you manage risk in a better way. And what is perfect? Perfect is that it's out in the organization, people are using it, engaging with it, and actually it hasn't failed. And so I imagine, so that's similar. So all of these things, I think, resonate in the same areas that we're working. And so that sort of takes me into where I'm seeing Agile start to sort of present itself more, well, basically, I keep saying there's been almost nothing better than a pandemic to bring forth the value of working Agile, for bad and good reasons. But some people in HR because in many organizations, HR is now front and center. They're having to keep their people safe. And they're also needing helping their business totally pivot direction. Some parts of a business is being totally shut down and workers furloughed is a term we use in Europe. And, or other parts, say a supermarket or something is booming, but it's all online. So you've got to help your business, change direction, ensure there's people that can work on these new directions or new projects, maybe even reskill people to make that happen, as well as help others where suddenly things have totally stopped. as well as helping people be safe, because you've got in most of Europe, we've all working from home. You need to know where people are they more at risk or not, all of these things. And so the whole of the HR space has become very much about working in view of what is the most valuable thing to work on right now for my business and my people. How do I get something out quickly that could help them, and then actually start to finesse it after that? So the amount of teams I know that have had to maybe stop this big project they were working on and suddenly work on a helpline, so employees could ring up and understand, ask questions or get a data information out to managers, so managers understood what was happening with their people and where they were and how to make decisions. So the MPV that Cindy was talking about has just been sort of forced upon so many HR teams I work with. And they've actually, if any of them were using Agile already, they've been able to just embrace it and go with it. And it's been really amazing to watch, actually.
Nice. So I am interested in, want to also hear from Cindy around the areas where Agile thinking is emerging in finance, and having that paradigm shift, maybe specifically around leadership, because that's an area oftentimes that we really have to be able to penetrate and get that buy-in and get that adoption from the leadership, so that not so that it's really a top-down process, but so that they know and understand how to support this type of environment. So where are you seeing the Agile thinking emerge in that area, Cindy?
It's a great question. I have heard often that Agile transformations have failed because of lack of true leadership buy-in. And I personally think that leaders say they want Agile transformations and then get into it and they backpedal real quick because it's not aligned with how they'd like to lead. And I can say really proudly and confidently that is not what I've experienced in our finance leadership team at PwC. I have seen, especially from our controller, such an incredible evolvement over time and how he's embraced Agile mindset and principles, as well as our senior leadership team and our directors. And so it's really important that it's top down in the buy-in, in my opinion, for it to be successful. It's been very much of a journey for our leaders. And I like to think of it as aha moments. It's like, once you get the aha moment of what you're doing maybe isn't working, or why we do certain things from an Agile perspective, then you get the momentum to learn the next new aha moment. But specifically for our leaders, intent-based leadership has been huge. I think you can find this a lot in many different organizations, but finance also, of command and control. And here's the checklist. Here's what you need to do. Please do every single thing I've told you to. Don't stray from that. And several years ago, intent-based leadership was introduced, and we thought we were doing it, Quincy, 4 years ago. We thought we knew what that meant. And it has not been until Agile's rolled out that we've been challenged as leaders of what sharing intent really means, creating that transparency of how you as a leader think and why you think a certain way, and then giving the autonomy to the delivery team to go and do. And that's been hard for me as a leader. I've seen it be hard for others, and really leaning in on that. But I've seen the benefits of it, very much so. And you know what I think is an amazing benefit of intent-based leadership is, I mentioned this earlier, is psychological safety. It goes a long way in creating safety and trust when you hand off the work to your teams to go and do how they'd like to, because you've shared your intent. Another component that leadership portfolio team has leaned in on is, let us remove roadblocks. If we're no longer telling you how to do your job, tell us what we can do to help you do your job faster and easier. And I've seen leadership really lean in there. What can I do to help you get this done? What barriers can I remove? And then finally, experimentation, which goes along with psychological safety, I think. But I've seen leadership be more comfortable with, let's experiment. which can feel very odd when you feel like you've had to be perfect in your past. Let's try it out. Let's see if it fails. If it does, it's okay. We'll just get better. And so leadership, I think at PwC is engaged in all of that, which has really helped make the transformation as successful as it is.
Yeah, and I could definitely see that being, early on a tough sell, to say, let's try stuff out with a room of finance professionals. I don't know if we want to try stuff, we want to do things that we know exactly what the outcome is going to be. And as you said, it's going to be perfect and so forth. So I could easily see that being a big, mind shift and paradigm shift, for folks. And when you were talking about, we thought we were doing intent-based leadership right until we started going down in the agile space. And that caused me to start thinking about the iterative nature of the agile space, and that we don't always get it perfect the first time, but it's in some instances, it's actually really by design that we get better over time, but it's strategically getting better over time. Mm-hmm. And so Yvonne, I am actually curious to know, in the Agile for Families space, where does the iterative nature come into play? How have you seen that part happen?
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about a specific iteration that we have done recently. You know how it gets to be winter and everybody's wearing winter coats and gloves and hats. And a lot of times those just end up all over your house. For me, it was in living room chairs, on couches. There was essentially no sitting space for any guests, finally, because there was just coats everywhere. And I was like, how do we solve this problem? Well, you solve this problem by figuring out where people can put the coats when they first come in the house. A lot of people have like a mudroom area, but we didn't have that. So we had to come up with a solution. And the first thing we did was we found a bookshelf that we had just laying around the house. And we put that in the front door area and allowed people to put their shoes there. So that was one item that was taken off the list. And then we had some extra command hooks laying around that we installed on the wall for coats, hats, and gloves. Each person in the family had their own command hook. The kids need a little help because we had to reach up to put them up there for them. But as long as they were able to take it off as soon as they entered, hand it to a parent, and get it hung up, it was easily done. What happened, of course, in the summer was it got to be about 90 degrees outside, and those command hooks fell off the wall. And then that no longer was a useful solution. So we had to pivot. We had to come up with a second iteration. And in this instance, we decided to go, my husband calls them the drunken octopus. I don't know if any of you had seen that meme, but they're the kind that you screw into the wall with the two little hooks that come off for things to hang on. And because the screw holes are a little bit off and they're not centered with each other, it makes it look kind of cockeyed or lopsided. And so that came out. And then that was our second iteration. And it will be iterated on again. But each time that we have to deal with that section, we just come up with what is our minimum viable solution. And I call them minimum viable results at my house because we don't have a product to release at the end. But we do have a result that we want to get, which is just to, in this case, get all of the coats and all of the shoes out of the sitting space or the middle of the floor so that everyone could walk around. And I feel like all of us have experienced that at some point or another.
I mean, I really, I love the effectiveness of that. And, I just think about how many either, arguments or reduction in arguments or whatever, that could take place that may actually happen right before someone goes into a meeting at home, since, we're all working from home. And those types of things with Agile for the Families can really make your everyday in work just that much better. because you're not being as distracted. You're a lot more streamlined and effective with how you're handling things in the household. I think Dan has a comment that came in on the chat. Do you have that, Dan?
I do. Yeah.
Can I
And
also
just,
ask? Sorry,
please.
can I ask
Sure.
Yvonne a question? Do
Absolutely.
you have any arguments in your house, or is it like is it all resolved through a stand-up?
We have some, but most things are resolved through your stand-up or your and actually we call it a daily scrum because stand-up felt like a little bit of an ableist term. And then or our weekly meeting when we discuss with the kids, like what are going to be the consequences for this action that you're doing. So, you've got a 3-year-old who's hitting because she's trying to figure out what's going on in the world. And you just say to her, we need to use kind hands and feet. What do you think should be the consequence if you hit your brother? And then she comes up with ideas, and sometimes they're silly, like, I want a whole chocolate bar if I hit him. That doesn't work, right? But everybody else in the family gets to put in their ideas too. And then you have a conversation about why getting a whole chocolate bar doesn't work. And that's wonderful. And the other thing that I want to hit on is chores. We don't talk about chores in my house. They're household tasks. They just have to be completed. Chores makes it sound kind of icky to me. Like, oh, I have to go do my chores now. But we also self-assign those household tasks. Nobody has to do laundry if laundry is the thing they hate to do, because it's not going to get done well. Nobody needs to load the dishwasher if loading the dishwasher is going to mean that all your dishes get broken. So, it's just nice to get that input instead of the traditional parenting waterfall.
And I have such an appreciation, for that when I'm thinking about just one, as far as the iterative part of it, that you said, and then how you're improving at time, and then how transparent everything is, and translating that back into, the workplace of being transparent. Okay, well, let's figure out together, how best to move forward, the level of collaboration that's having to take place, and really the concepts that are being strengthened in the home that will translate outside the home. Like, I think that's really wonderful. I did want to go back to Dan. He had a comment that he was going to chime in
Yeah.
with.
No, and I was happy to have Natal's comment prioritized ahead of mine. Not a problem.
Like, we're all trying to figure it out, Natal.
Order this backlog real time. It'll be great. There was a comment in the chat that sometimes the C-suite folks feel like they're buying in when the Agile thing is trendy. Everybody else is doing it, so we should too. And then the middle management folks get lost, where to this point in their career, they've been rewarded for directing and tasking and managing and reporting and those kinds of things. So maybe any comments where you see these challenges or behavior outside of, again, the software world?
Anyone want to?
And that's open to anybody on the panel. So, yeah.
So I'll jump in while you will think about if there's something specific to your areas. But I do. So there is definitely that trend out there where senior leadership, and I think it's a little less now than it was, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago, but where senior leadership, they get wind of this whole Agile thing, and they hear that it's cheaper and faster. And quite frankly, a lot of times after that, I'm not so sure they hear anything else other than cheaper, faster. Like, that's it. And then, well, yes, let's do that thing. That is the cheaper, faster thing, that Agile thing that you all said. And they don't quite know what they're signing up for until they get in it. And once they're in there and realize, oh, wait, there's something I have to do. I didn't know that. I thought IT was just going to go and do this thing, or this area is just going to go and do this thing, and we just plug it in. And it does tend to cause middle management in particular to struggle the most, because they become, in my experience, they become in a quandary about, how do I manage if teams are self-organizing, if they're collaborating and working on things themselves? Like, when do I step in and tell them what to do? And that becomes a point of contention at times, especially in a transformation. And so there is a good place actually for them, and there's plenty of value in what they need to do. There's a lot of mentoring that needs to happen for one that they can be very instrumental with. So yes, I am curious as well to hear from the panel here, what have you seen and what do you think in that particular area?
I'll yes and everything you said, Quincy, as reasons that the C-suite struggle. I also think they just don't understand it. And so when you start to reveal principles around Agile, they are an antithesis to how many leaders have been leading and have been successful their entire careers. They have gotten to the top by doing the opposite of Agile. They've been probably very much more I than we at times. And when you say it's we versus I, that can just really mess with someone's head. I think it messes with leaders' heads as much as it messes with middle management's heads, but leaders are expected to figure it out often. So I've really taken to this idea, and again, our leadership, our C-suite has embraced it, but we may have partnerships or stakeholders at that level that haven't. And it's seed planting for us. It's dropping off things that have worked. It's changing terms so they don't sound Agile, but the principles are embedded that really start to connect, and they can see the benefit, and the aha starts to happen. And then you can begin to introduce more and more to them. But it can be really challenging if the leaders are not bought in. But seed planting is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. Mostly because it's usually one parent who doesn't want to buy in, because we were all parented waterfall style, and it's really easy to fall back on what you know.
And what's made you successful, like, why would I change this if I've gotten to where I'm at doing it one way? So.
Definitely. And I also think that, so different roles have different vulnerabilities, isn't it, when Agile comes in? And the C-suite is this idea that they have to actually show vulnerability, embrace this concept of, working with others to get the solution, embracing getting, failure, this idea, so there's lots in that, where up until now, the concept of a senior leader is very much linked to target setting, getting the goals. And if you think about it, not all of society is that helpful, because we still have a lot of this kind of merit-driven, kind of results-driven environment. And if you're a public company, you're still held up to perform at a certain level. And so there's a lot of kind of mixed messages in that sense. So I think it's quite hard in that way. However, a C-suite, there is this idea that, well, the idea of alignment through vision and purpose, and really kind of setting the goal, and really, so there is still that clear, I think, role to play in C-suite when Agile comes in. But for middle management, it's less clear. And because the great stuff happens in the team, doesn't it? And you just said, there's the team, and what's my role anymore? I can't give them instructions. And I think a lot of it is that we have to help them find what you were saying, Quincy, their new role. So is that to be a mentor? Is that more of a product kind of role? These kind of things. But also, and I find this really helpful for HR teams and other teams I've worked with, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Because I think if you just come in with this idea of Agile innovation being about the system and the ways of working, which I'm, greatly value, but if you link it more to the problem, and then what role are you going to play in solving that problem? And do you see yourself in a product ownership role? Do you see yourself now as more of a coach and mentor? Or do you want to go and change, and giving people and this is where HR can play a big role. If you're transparent and you're open about how you co-create the new roles and the new teams, that is so powerful. And it still takes time, but I think middle managers can have a better way of kind of navigating through it. But I think, and that's what I was saying, kind of commenting with the lady or person that left the comment, is that, yeah, middle management have almost the most to lose in sometimes when Agile comes in, don't they? So it's not as clear where they go. And then there was been a comparison of middle management with middle child. Yvonne, did you want to comment on that?
I usually find that the children buy in relatively easily because they're really excited to have their voice heard. But there is typically one parent who isn't sure. In my house, I'm married to a software developer. When I went to him and I said, hey, do you want to run Agile at home? And he was like, huh? Well, first I asked him actually if he knew what Agile was. And then he looked at me like, yes, duh. So he bought in relatively easily. And then as it worked, and actually I think works more effectively because we're a 4-person team and not trying to run a whole bunch of people, staying in time boxes and all of those things is significantly easier. But I find that the kids just love that the parents want to know what they think.
Yes. Yeah, I think that, so part of what someone put in the chat was an analogy of the middle child being compared to middle management. And I think that is a wonderful, analogy or metaphor because I am not a middle child. However, there is a middle child in my family. And, and we've had those kind of discussions before, where does the middle child sometimes feel left out or maybe not as much attention given as to the youngest child being the team, or maybe not as much responsibility and empowerment as being given to the oldest child, the leadership. And so middle management sometimes sits there and feels like, well, what is it that I can do, in this new space? I don't really know how I fit in. And one of the things that that was mentioned, Yvonne, I think you brought up first, and Natal kind of reinforced it, and Cindy, I believe, mentioned it as well, is about really the concept of being effective with the words that you use. If the term Agile doesn't resonate well, if saying Scrum triggers things because of past experiences or whatever the case, then, fine, we can do the concept without having, the labels on it. As long as we're being effective and we're getting the outcomes that we're looking for. And those outcomes not just being the output from, the team or the system, but the true outcomes of, are we moving towards business agility? Are the people in the organization developing and growing and maturing in their professions? Are they happier at work? Are they producing better products because they're enjoying what they're doing more? And so figuring out ways to convey that without getting caught up with the labels, I think that is, really key in many cases, even within the same organization, because the labels that you use for leadership or the terms and so forth, they may not work for the teams and vice versa, as well as with middle management. So I know we're really close to the time before we have to do the wrap up. Is there anything else that someone on the panel may want to chime in on in our last few minutes, like anything that's burning that you would like to say?
I'll say that our Agile transformation has been 18 months. And when we first started working with AgileThought, you guys told us it's a journey, it's going to take a long time. And, accountants are like, no, we're going to get it done quickly and we're going to move on to the next thing. So it's been incredibly humbling journey, but it has been the most challenging transformation I've ever been a part of. And there's been times you think, should we just quit? But it has been by far the most rewarding, the most empowering that I've experienced in my career. And it's, I say that to encourage anyone who, first of all, if you're on the journey, it's going to take longer than you think. It's going to be more challenging than you anticipated, but lean in on it because it's so worth it in the end. and commit to it and do it. And I think it's been totally worth it, but just take some time.
Awesome. It's a journey. Lean into it. Commit
Yes.
to it. I love it. What
Yeah.
about anyone else with parting words?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There will be backslide with parents. Like, it is so easy to just go back to parenting the exact way that you were parented, because that's your default. That's what you fall back to when you're stressed out or any of those things. But if you can come back and have your next meeting and reset, then you'll be able to iterate further. You just have to acknowledge the fact that, hey, I started doing this waterfall thing again, where I told somebody how this was going to be, and this was the rule, and I didn't acknowledge this this open communication.
I love that we've sort of explored it in different areas. And what I think is a kind of a big message, and this is probably helpful for anyone working in HR, is that there is no end state as such, isn't it? So we talk about transformation, and unfortunately, transformation is often associated with this end state, this new way of doing the organization. And so much of organizational change has been presented like that in the past. But really, we're looking at an evolution of the future of work, and Agile is so caught up in that. And we're all trying to find answers of how we deliver value in new ways, how we meet customers in new ways, and how we collaborate and work together. Whether that be digitally now, be at home, what's the hybrid office? There's so much in this. And so I think the more that we embrace that and see that this is an evolution, and Agile helps you navigate that, helps you deal with the complexity and find great ways to work. But they'll keep evolving, which is a good thing. So that would be my message is, but that's a big thing for people in a traditional way of working in HR to really kind of embrace, I think, as well.
Nice. Well, thanks, Natal. Well, I am most definitely humbled and, again, very appreciative to have such a great panel of experts today, and just the knowledge and impartation that you've given in this Agile space in your respective areas and industry. Just really appreciate it. So I'm actually going to hand it back over to Dan for him to wrap us up for today.
Of course. No, thanks, Quincy and Natal, Yvonne, Cindy, thank you for joining and sharing about agility in your context. For people that are watching, you might want to get ready to capture a screenshot or use your camera to catch some QR codes. There's some LinkedIn contact information coming up, so that's a little advance notice. You can find that if you'd like. We do these virtual community events on a periodic basis. We don't have the next one on the calendar, but please do watch your inbox for an invite with how to connect to and sign up for the next virtual community event. And you can find the past ones at agilethought.com/library. And as promised, here is some QR codes for LinkedIn connection for Natal, Yvonne, Cindy, and Quincy. So that is the last part of what we had planned today. I want to thank everybody again for joining, their time and their contributions as panelists and in the chat. So thank you very much.